And now, it is my honor to present our first speaker outside of ourselves. Celia Grand is a licensed clinical social worker, an EMDRIA approved EMDR Advanced Consultant and trainer. She was a part of Kara and I's training when we went through our initial basic training. She offers wisdom of 40 plus years of experience working with many different types of clients, diagnoses, and different psychotherapy models. She's been an EMDR therapist for over 25 years, and not only has she been crucial to our development of the model, but she has worked significantly with our advisors, our team, even some of our preferred providers to make sure that we are working towards the highest quality of care.
So thank you so much for having me again this year, and for all the new faces. I'm really excited to present to you, walk you down trauma lane and what we know about trauma. And as a social scientist, and a neuroscientist, I will give you a little bit of neuroscience. I took a lot of it out because I didn't want to bore you, but it's my passion. But we're one of the professions that we don't study, we're just learning about the brain, and that's the organ in which we're treating. So knowing the science behind the brain and how it works and how trauma affects the brain, because it's going to affect every part of your life, that's what I'm really interested in. And I think that the general public really needs to understand what trauma is, how it lives in us, and how we can treat it. So I've been working with Growth Minded for a couple years now, and it's been just a joy to watch this team of incredible therapists come together and under Kara's guidance really flush out a continuity of care for a community. It's not happening across the United States. This is not happening. This is brand new, where people are coming together in a community to deal with the problems in America right now. And so this continuum of care, where you have your donations will be given to certain populations that will get the care with people who are trained. Part of the problem with the most vulnerable people in our country right now is that they're often treated by new therapists. So the fact that your donations will go to pay people who are trained and who have the skill to do acute care, that's what we need. So I'm going to just start with my presentation. You can change the slide. So I'm gonna come here. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I forgot.
My aging eyes, I need to have my glasses on. So as Kara and Sarah and Caitlin had said, the who, the people, I'm not going to go through that, but your donation helps with the 12 sessions. It helps with the Root to Branch library that is going to be really stellar. We've been sort of cultivating that around what are the things that people need, even if they don't qualify for the program. And specialized workshops. I did one for breast cancer this year, and it was really a beautiful presentation for people who are suffering with breast cancer, and to learn how to embody their bodies after such a violation of chemotherapy. And psychoeducation and skill building groups. So for me personally, being a volunteer from a clinical standpoint, I'm towards the end of my career. I'm old. I don't look it, but I am. And I'm at the end of my career. And so for me to pass this along, pass my knowledge to younger therapists who are learning how to really treat trauma, has been just such a joy for me. And to work with a group of people who want to make change in their community. So, next slide. So let's get into what is trauma. So trauma, when a trauma occurs, our systems get overwhelmed, and it's leaving us to feel unsafe. We feel a sense of threat, and we feel disconnected from our sense of self and our bodies. So healing trauma helps us to rebuild connection, calm, and the capacity to thrive. Next slide. So the problem with trauma is that our nervous system is wired up for defense. Our brain is wired up for defense. When we're born, we have an innate alarm system. So we're wired to adapt to what's happening in our worlds, and we're also wired to defend. So once we have a trauma, now our nervous system has a new code. It's our brains, if our brains are not flexible and adaptable to overcome the trauma, then it's going to get stuck in our nervous system, and it's going to get stuck in our brains. So instead of when our brains can be flexible and adaptive, because we're wired to adapt to any situation, our brains run rigid, and they go through like a loop. And we go through, I'm going to talk about this, our brains are wired for prediction. So our brains are like a hard drive in our computers. It stores memory. Whatever it knows, it's going to be stored. So if a trauma happens, guess what gets stored? All the components of that trauma. So now our code for dealing with trauma is now altered, and now we're in constant threat. We don't think it, we don't know it, we think we're going along fine, we think we got over it, until something happens in our environment, and all of a sudden all of that old stuff starts coming back. That's called a trigger. And people get triggered, and they behave and they respond as if threat is still happening. That's the problem with trauma. So the impact of trauma, next slide, thank you, is that you can see in every aspect of our lives, from the physical to the emotional to the psychological to the spiritual, we have an impact. So on a physical level, we have nervous system activation. What does that mean? We either get too much anxiety, and we all know people who go 0 to 100, or they get shut down. They can't talk, they can't speak, they withdraw, they pull in. So that's called traumatic activation. And then we have a tendency to, our muscles will get tense. Digestive problems, there's a ton of IBS out there, so if anybody's got IBS, look into your trauma history, because our digestion is directly affected by trauma. We get sleep disturbance, fatigue, low energy, so that's some of the physical. The emotional, you'll have mood swings, feelings of overwhelm, anxiety and fear, sadness and grief, anger and irritability. Those are some of the emotional impacts. The psychological will be more intrusive flashbacks. Flashbacks are when people get a fragment of memory. Remember that stimulus out here, and you think, oh, that car accident wasn't that bad, or that sexual assault I'm over with, or that community violence that I witnessed is done, and then all of a sudden something happens, and now you're in a triggered state, and you start to see different fragments of that event. Startle responses, that's that jumpy startle response. The sense of self gets really altered. People live by, I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough, I'm not enough. So our sense of self and the belief about ourselves gets compromised. And we get a feeling of disconnected, and avoidance is one of the telltale signs. People who've been traumatized think that they're okay, they're gonna work really hard to get over it, I'll do better tomorrow, and they're just avoiding the inevitable that trauma is going to catch up with them. And then probably one of the hardest pieces is the spiritual impact, where people feel a sense of aloneness in the world. They would have guilt or shame about surviving, feeling abandoned, loss of trust in life, loss of awe and joy, and a deep yearning for healing. So people are walking around with this impact on trauma, and I really believe, and I say this to clients all the time, I believe that people who come into our offices are people who have done everything humanly possible to overcome their trauma. And when they come to us, they're at their most vulnerable. Hence why we want the most skilled people to be working with these clients, especially in a short-term model like this. I can't even explain the breadth of like what Root to Branch is trying to do. To treat someone with a severe trauma in 12 sessions is an act of God, honestly. And you really need skilled people to be able to go in, make a quick assessment, and jump right in and get the work done and get people back into their life. And so your donation and being here is helping this is what we have to do to get us back on track as a society, to help these vulnerable populations. Okay, so what is EMDR? So EMDR is a therapy. It's called eye movement desensitization reprocessing. The originator, Francine Shapiro, would have renamed it as reprocessing therapy. So if you think about it, if our brains store memory, when we have an experience, like tonight, you'll go home, you'll either have wonderful conversations, or you might feel like, oh, that was such a great event, and you'll go to sleep, and you'll go into REM sleep, and REM sleep is what's going to make the memory happen, and that's called consolidated memory when you wake up. And then when you'll go on with your life and blah, 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 and then you might see something on the news about a first responder or a crime in your community, and you'll go, I remember I went to that gala. And I talked to some really cool people, and I really thought it was a great event. That's how our memory works. It calls it up when there's a stimulus, and if we had a good experience, we're going to remember a good experience, and then we go on with our lives, and it just goes back into stored memory, just like, your computer. But when you have a trauma and that trauma gets stored, then what happens is you'll think of the night. So say something happens, and God forbid something happens on your way home, and you go, I went to that gala, and we got in that fender bender, and the insurance company wouldn't pay, and they said it was my fault, and then you got a whole story about this gala, right? You're going to go to bed, you're going to go to sleep, and then when you see another car accident, you're going to go, oh, I remember that car accident I was in at the gala. And you're going to remember it. Now, if it was a fender bender and you fought with the insurance and they paid for it, you're going to go, yeah, that was just a really bad experience. But if you then didn't have the money to fix your car, and then you couldn't get your car fixed, and then you lost your job, and then there was all these series of things that happened, then you're going to recall that car accident, and you're going to have a bad association to the memory. That's what happens with trauma. You end up with a bad association to the event in which you experienced that trauma. So when a memory is getting made, it's either going to get adapted or it's going to get stuck. So a stuck memory, a regular memory, as I said, it's an ideal process. And I'm sorry, let me just grab something. I gotta put my glasses on. So in a regular memory, It's an ideal brain process. An event happens, it gets linked up appropriately into your memory system. Something reminds you of the event, and if you had positive or neutral thoughts, as I just said about the gala, when you recall the event, you're going to say, I did an okay job. It was a good event. I am really happy that I'm donating. You can see the subliminal there, right? And then sometimes a memory gets stuck. An event happens and it gets stuck in your memory. And it gets stuck because at the moment of trauma, the brain goes into a defense, and the components of the experience, the thoughts, the images, the beliefs, the feeling state, what happens to your senses, what's happening in your body, we call that state-specific memory, that gets downloaded, that becomes a stuck memory. The brain's not flexible, it's getting stuck, and then it goes underground, and then it comes up, and when it comes up, the person will usually say something about themselves. I'm a failure. There's something wrong with me. Why is this happening? I did something wrong. I'm not good enough. I'm not capable of dealing with this. And that's how memory gets stuck. So with EMDR, a therapist will bring up those components of memory that got stuck. The thoughts, the images, the feelings, the body sensation, what happened to the senses, and then through what we call bilateral stimulation, it's usually eye movements, and there's something about the mechanism of the eye movements that starts the brain to unpack how it stored memory. There's a lot of different theories around how memory, why that happens, and what happens in REM sleep, and how that consolidates memory. And I'm going to talk about memory reconsolidation and how that happens and why we think EMDR works. But what we're doing is we're bringing the client through a series of different, we bring up the memory, and then we either have them do eye movements. You see me do this because this is how we guide, and then there's some online programs and some devices, but we have someone watch our fingers go back and forth, and then at different times we say, let it go, take a breath, what are you noticing now? And the client just reports out what's happening. And then we say, go with that. Once we set up that brain to start processing, it's just like a Google search. It's like we're letting that brain broadcast across everything it knows, and then the person says, we say, what do you notice? And they say the next thing that they experienced in the moment that we're doing this bilateral stimulation. So it's not necessarily recalling what happened and feeling what happened then. It's recalling and what's happening now. So trauma's not what happened to you X amount of years ago. It's what's still in you. So when we stop and we say, what do you notice? We're asking that client, how is this affecting you now? Okay, so let's just see how you're affected. Okay, take a break, let it go, take a breath. What are you noticing now? And we're saying, how are you experiencing that trauma that you had before? How are you dealing with it now? And so we're doing the past and present, until the person no longer in their now feels distressed or disturbed. Does that make sense? So it's like we're exposing people to their memory network, how things got stored. We're bringing it up. We're mixing it up. Why? There's something about, we'll go into the next slide, bilateral stimulation that unlocks how it got locked in and stored in the brain. And as it unlocks and we're having the client report out, we start to notice change. And it's a natural process. And in the EMDR theory, we believe that the brain has the same capacity to heal than if you cut your finger and you got antibodies that came to that cut and scarred it over. Your brain has that same capacity. So, oh, why are we on brain resilience? We should be on yeah, there we go. Thank you, Gabby. The bilateral stimulation helps the brain finish what trauma interrupted. It connects both sides of the brain so memory can move from being raw and painful to being resolved and integrated. So that's what bilateral stimulation does. We can also not just do eye movements, because some people can't follow the eye movements, so we have tapping, so we can have a client tap. There are some devices that they can hold these paddles, and that will also give the bilateral stimulation. And believe it or not, the eyes will move if you're tapping. People close their eyes and their eyes are moving. It's just a really interesting phenomenon. We don't know why that works. And we also have sound. So like one thing you could do is like there's these little bumps in your ears. If you go back and forth, you hear like a little whoosh sound. That could be bilateral stimulation. We can do it that way, and we also have like headsets, and there's a couple programs that you can get online that have sound. So once we stimulate the brain, we're opening it up. We're allowing it to free flow. And in that free flow is when the brain can change. So next slide. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to build brain resiliency. And resiliency is the capacity to bounce back from stress and adversity. So if your brain was traumatized and now it's underground and you're not treated, you may have some behavioral problems, you may have some physical problems, you may have some emotional problems, relationship problems, and you're not bouncing back. So as we unpack the trauma and we start to see change happen, all of those things change. We're building resiliency, meaning we're getting that brain to be stronger. Next slide. So now I'm going to go into my social scientist little hat, because I think this jives me and I think everybody should know about it. But we have some emerging science. And as I said, trauma creates stuck patterns, and EMDR therapy helps the brain become more flexible. Our neuroscience has described trauma as dysregulation in the stress response circuits. So our brain, our circuits, networks, and systems. And at one point, we used to just know about the function of the brain. Now we're really looking at how the brain works and how it all works together. And then there was a generation where we only talked about the body and not the brain, and then it was the brain and not the body. And now neuroscience is bringing this together, and we're starting to unpack another way of looking at trauma. And this is really exciting stuff that I came across recently, is to understand trauma as an algorithm. So you know when you go on Facebook or social media or you go Google, right? And they're just going to feed you what you've already put into it. That's an algorithm. Our brains are the same way. The guy who developed AI was actually trying to do a computation of the brain. He was doing a mathematical computation of the brain, and he stumbled upon artificial intelligence. And the artificial intelligence got better than the brain. So what we learned from that, and what we're learning from AI, for good, bad, or ugly, whatever your thought is about it, is that it's actually teaching us how our brains work. And so what really jives me about the algorithm, to me, it's like the key to trauma, because now we can look at, there's a whole group of people, it's called the Affectome Project. There's a whole group of people, of philosophers, neuroscientists, psychiatrists, people in the medical community, psychologists and therapists, that are starting to create, this project is going to create a common language for treating trauma. So all disciplines can have a language around trauma, which is really exciting. And so this emerging science around algorithm is where this is going. So some of my consultees haven't even heard this stuff because it's really hot off the press. Next slide. So in affective neuroscience, an algorithm is a set of steps or rules the brain and the body system follows when processing information. So you have to think of the brain as an information processor. That's all it is. We have a lot of emotional attachment to what our brains are doing, but our brains are just giving us information that's already in there. So trauma can be thought of as the brain's predictive and defensive algorithms. So now, instead of being wired up to adapt to situations and flow through life and get through life, and as you age, you realize that life gets harder, it doesn't get easier. And if you're already a traumatized person, your algorithm is now in this predictive and defensive way of dealing with the world. And these algorithms are not consciously chosen. They're automatic. They're seen as automatic survival codes learned from overwhelming experiences. Next slide. So by understanding trauma as an algorithmic process, we can hold both the science and the humanity of healing. So we see trauma differently now. We see that the brain is not broken. It's just running a survival code, an old code that can be updated with safety, connection, and practice. So why does this matter? Next slide. Trauma and its symptoms are increasingly viewed not just as pathological states, but as survival codes. So in that, what we're doing, next slide, is we're rewiring the brain. So the human brain has the capacity to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. So next slide. So another little bit of science, and I promise it's not going to be too much. But it's really important to understand this because all of your brains do this. It's called predictive coding. And in a healthy brain, it consistently generates predictions about incoming sensory input and compares them to the actual input. So what does that mean? Your brain, some of you know about trauma, and some of you are going, I know what she's talking about. And some of you don't know anything about trauma, and you're going, I don't know anything about what she's talking about, but I'm really trying. Your brain is taking in information, everything, and it's now comparing what it knows. And only when it doesn't know what it knows, it opens up to new learning. And so that is really important because in trauma, the predictive coding goes awry. You don't have a good predictive coder. You have a trauma prediction. So what does that look like? If you're in a safe situation, say a veteran or a first responder, and they're in a safe situation, they're reading the situation as unsafe. That's what trauma does. So the predictive coder is off. Okay, so I gotta hurry up here because I'm going through my time. So EMDR, this is what EMDR does. It does memory reconsolidation. It takes out that stuck memory. We shape shift it. We mix it up a little bit through the eye movements. And then we put it back and we keep taking it out and putting it back until the person no longer feels distressed. That's when we know that EMDR has worked. And so this is the way you want to think about it. Predictive coding is the big picture operating system of the brain, while memory reconsolidation is the app or the programs running within it that allows a deep, durable change. It's an unconscious change that happens, and then evidenced by changes in behavior and relationships and view of self. So predictive coding explains why the brain resists change, and memory reconsolidation it provides the mechanism for how lasting therapeutic change occurs once the memory is destabilized. And then, next slide. This is called the power of neuroplasticity. Our brains are designed to be flexible and fluid and adapt to change. So EMDR opens up those pathways for that to get restored. So we end up, next slide please, remembering when a trauma is resolved, we end up remembering the traumatic memories that are in the past with the appropriate emotional responses. People feel in the present while remembering their past. So remember, I had said when someone's traumatized, they feel, when that stimulus happens, they feel that the trauma is happening at the time when it's not. So we're restoring that, and we're also, the awareness of self is maintained and the past self stays in the past. Our brains have a capacity to mental time travel. We can call up a memory of the past, we can call up a memory of the past, and we can think about that memory, and then we can have a different experience from remembering that memory once it's in the past. Okay, last but not least, how can you help? Because this is really important when people are traumatized. Next slide. How to listen to a traumatized person. This is what you can do. If you come across someone who's been traumatized, or you have an employee or a coworker that had a trauma, one thing that you can do is give your full attention. Put down your phone, make eye contact, and listen without interrupting. Validate feelings. It makes sense that you're feeling that way. Reflect back gently. It sounds like you really felt scared and powerless. Allow silence. Just let things land. You don't want to push for details. You don't want to minimize. You don't want to make it about you. And a supportive listening script could be like, thank you for trusting me with this. I can see how much this hurts. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. What feels most supportive to you right now? Taking more time together. So those are the ways that you can listen. And then the next slide, Gabby, then what to say. Because it can be awkward when someone's overly emotional and you don't know what to say to them. I'm sorry this happened to you. I want you to know I believe you and I'm here for you. You don't need to share any details unless you want to. I'm just here to listen. You can affirm safety. You're safe with me right now. You're not alone in this. I care about you. You can encourage autonomy. Would it feel okay if I just checked in with you later? You're in control of what you want to talk about. If you want, I can help you find supportive resources. So these are the ways that you can offer your help to someone who you come across who've been traumatized. And last slide, I just want to thank you for listening to me and let me geek out on some neuroscience and hopefully give you some education around what trauma is and what happens in your brain. And I really appreciate all of you being here and donating whatever you donate. And even if it's just listening to someone or talking to someone who's been traumatized, that is a great donation at the least of it all. So thank you so much, and I appreciate all of you here.